Hey guys, Zane here with another One Take review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Deer Hunter album, Antimai. Antimai is the latest studio album from progressive rock slash pop rock band The Deer Hunter, a definite cult favorite of recent years and a somewhat critical favorite as well. They aren't nearly as well known as certain other recent prog acts, but at the same time they stand alongside a lot of other pop-influenced progressive rock bands as a sort of face of the new wave of progressive rock music that we are seeing going on in the 21st century at the moment. And I have to give them credit, they've done some great work in the past, and Antimai is another creative outing, it's just that this is far from their best as well. Antimai is a very interesting listen as it combines a lot of traditional progressive rock sounds with slight amounts of pop rock and maybe even some indie pop rock kind of stuff that is very radio rock ready, like some Coheed and Cambria or something like that. There is a lot of different influences being included here that generally mesh together pretty well. Now, the Deer Hunter aren't the first act to ever do this kind of sound. Like I just said, this is an entire movement going on within the progressive pop and progressive rock niches in the music world at the moment, but at the same time, it is a sound that works well nonetheless. Although it is an easy sound to screw up by relying on one side of things or another, whether you're relying on the progressive side or the more pop-oriented side, the Deer Hunter really know how to balance the two, and overall I think that the very progressive notes as well as the underlying, a bit commercially applicable flavors of Antimai are equally as well executed. Antimai is a very theatrical record in nature, and this is where my first major criticism starts to come in. Antimai sounds less like a combination of progressive music and theater and more like a progressive rock band accidentally wandered into the same studio that the traveling ensemble of Dear Evan Hansen were supposed to be using for a cast recording. And look, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm a Dear Evan Hansen fan, and you know what? There have been progressive bands that have been majorly theatrical throughout history. Even the most iconic prog bands of all time, like Jethro Tull and Rush, could be cited as theatrical to some extent on some of their records, like Tull's Thick as a Brick, or Rush's a lot of things like A Farewell to Kings, for example, but it doesn't quite work here. It makes it feel like the Deer Hunter aren't really taking themselves seriously enough as artists, and in turn the record is dragged down by this aspect of its sound. And I would say it's understandably a turnoff for a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to hear songs that sound like cut tunes from the Hamilton musical mixed in with odd time signatures that you'd hear from your average prog band. And while I don't personally mind it, and I think it's an interesting sound, especially in a world where a lot of progressive bands sound remarkably similar to the next progressive band, I still feel like the novelty aspect that comes with theatrical sounds ultimately makes this a less strong listen than it really should be. If Antimai were just compositionally a touch more serious in tone, but still with that lighthearted playfulness that it already delivers, it could have been a really great listening experience overall, at least in that particular regard in terms of thematics and overall tone and overarching presentation, but instead it just kind of goofs off a bit too much. The other issue is that Antimai can be very, very exhausting as well. Now let me get one thing straight, the Deer Hunter are excellent performers, and this record is performed brilliantly overall. It's just the fact that this record is also put together in a manner that is just hard to digest in one sitting, to say the least, which is especially annoying considering this is theoretically a concept album, something that you're meant to sit through from beginning to end. Surprisingly, the exhaustion that comes with listening to this album isn't actually from the repeated usage of theatrical elements or anything like that. It's not from that at all. It's just the fact that although great performers, the Deer Hunter really don't do much with each of their individual songs, and like any prog band, if you are familiar with progressive music of any kind, pop, rock, whatever, you know for a fact that bands like to, extend their songs way longer than they really should be, but the greats, the true masters of the genre, know how to keep a 15-minute long song interesting and worth listening every second of it. The Deer Hunter are willing to expand their songs to relatively average lengths by progressive rock and pop standards, but unfortunately they don't really do much with the instrumentals overall. Even with the moments where there seems to be some sort of a big climactic change in the overall archetype of the sound of individual songs, it kind of does feel like the Deer Hunter don't really care about doing anything particularly powerful or unique, and it all begins to blend together after a while, and while that can work for some records, admittedly, it just simply doesn't for Antimai. I would easily have been more positive about this record had the compositions themselves been a touch more interesting beyond theater influences, as the Deer Hunter as an outfit and collective are actually extraordinarily talented, and I suppose if you are looking for an impressive technical side of things, this would be highly recommendable, but unfortunately for a casual listener, or even for a diehard prog fan, a lot of this record just simply doesn't go anywhere. Out of its entire runtime, maybe half of the minutes that Antimai runs for is warranted, and the rest just is kind of noodling that is completely unremarkable and seemingly goes nowhere. And outside of the pieces that have the vocals that inevitably come with progressive music territory, a lot of Antimai is utterly forgettable. So overall, Antimai could have been a great record, but unfortunately, even with some less than exciting in terms of actual execution, but promising influences from a more theatrical side of things, a lot of the band and their work here just end up noodling and not really doing anything particularly exciting or interesting. That being said, the Deer Hunter are strong performers, it's just the fact that they don't really know how to utilize it in the proper manner, which is why I'm going to give this record 3 stars out of 5. My one take on Antimai is that it is an excellently performed record that just seems to misuse the majority of its influences, resulting in something that doesn't take itself seriously enough, and also doesn't really feel lighthearted enough in terms of actual composition to work in either field. This record ultimately just doesn't do much at all, even if it is very respectable from an artistic standpoint. So again, 3 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.